We are going to do a session today on disruptive innovation. Now, we have a sum total of 0 slides. And you've met me, so you know I find it difficult to shut up. But the intent, at least, is that there will not be a 10-minute, finger-wagging lecture, although, I will do my best. That's all I'm saying. But to keep me on the rails, Frank has volunteered to do what we would describe as a two-hander. What we're looking at doing is 5-minute salvos, where we just take a perspective, deliver that, excuse my French, in your general direction for a few minutes each, and then come back for questions. Now, my thinking is that we'll drop the questions in as we go, so we won't necessarily have a 20-minute talk followed by a discussion. It'll be a bit more broken up than that. But that is our intent, to discuss, to explore disruptive innovation for about 45, 50 minutes, and then we'll wrap up with a couple of thoughts about what's coming in the next few weeks. Rocky, I see you've also joined us. Welcome back. Great to see you. And your very glamorous office.
Sorry, okay. I've not been here for a while. Sorry about that, guys.
You're welcome back. It's all good. Now. Yeah, this is a community. Seemingly, we're not supposed to be blaming people for not being here every Friday when they have paid work to do. So we live with that. That is the nature of the beastie. Okay, so what is disruptive innovation? Well, is it important? Is it good? Is it bad? I know some people in this room who are, prone to have strong opinions. It would be lovely to hear some of those. I think if Frank and I were the only voices or the main voices, you might hear a more private sector voice. I think there's a necessary corrective there. So a bit of public or non-governmental or, a different perspective would be useful. I'd like to throw in the word antifragile, but we'll see. Doesn't necessarily deserve half an hour of its own time. And then if your own questions or thoughts on disruption, put them in the chat at any time. We'll pick them up today, or we'll pick them up the next time we come back to the subject if it grows legs. That's our thinking for the hour. Welcome, Christopher. Good to see you. And I will kick off then. Kick off at your ABCs, your 1, 2, 3s, at your foundation, basic concept, words and meanings. Disruptive innovation, when I started studying it, did my head in, because how I was finding it, where I was finding it, and what it seemed to me more useful for were very different. And that was, well, quite a long time ago. So I don't think it's changed since. And we won't change the world around us just because we chat about it today. But I'm going to give you the dictionary definition. And you've met me, so you'll be absolutely shocked to hear this is coming straight out of the ISO 56000. And then Frank will give us a far more useful, far more user-friendly process, something that's coming from his own heart, from the bottom of his heart, let's say. So in the world of innovation management, we make distinctions between different kinds of innovations, and we give a definition to disruptive innovation, which is really simple, actually. It's initially addressing less demanding needs, displacing established offerings. That's it. And then it goes on to say, you're talking about in a market, you're not talking about technology, you're not talking about the invention, you're not talking about the nature of the innovation itself. You're talking about the place that it's used, the people who use it, the reasons that people use it. Okay. So that's the definition in the dictionary. Frank, not necessarily a 5-minute piece, but over to you. Your thoughts on making it friendly, making it useful.
Well, I'll give you 2 case studies, and I think they're designed, rather than being kind of comprehensive, they're designed to start getting questions. So the first thing to say is that if you went back 20 years ago, we in the technology space would have been expecting flying cars. And instead, we got TikTok and Facebook. So we don't seem to have done brilliantly as a species. But I would put to you that some technology has changed our lives. And a specific one is Teams, Zoom, Google Meet. This ability to create organizations that are effective but distributed. If you go back probably around 2013. Ron Emick and myself spent a lot of drink and a lot of time talking about distributed consultancy, where we could have clients globally, to use Ron's phrase, get up in our underpants and go on the internet and give people advice. And in the end, we thought it was a crazy idea and we just dismissed it. Today, my neighbor's daughter works for a well-known FDI. She logs in from the Antarctic, from the Amazon, from the Kenyan Rift Valley, from Hong Kong, and that's just 2025. So there's loads of positives for her and for the organization as well in terms of attracting and retaining talent. But with disruption comes value and comes cost. And I can see from my work that clients are losing significantly when they have 2 days or less mandated in the office. Very rapidly, ambient intelligence is damaged. These are the cultural cues, the domain expertise that germinates naturally when you have people working beside each other. And that domain expertise, or lack of it, is a significant barrier for younger people. It's the currency that allows them to go from graduate trainee to senior management. Also, for the management in place, one of the key ways I've learned about operational efficacy is management by walking around, picking up small and big signals by simply watching and parsing behavior. And that's not really possible when most of your crew are in their underpants at home, far, far away from you. So that's the impact I can see. What I can give you is something very specific. One of my favorite companies right now is a crew called Alchemy in Skerries. They have 60 people. They're based in Skerries in Malaga. 2 years ago at a town hall, the CEO said, look, we've got great trending data on OKRs and performance. So here's the gig. Why don't we try and maintain the same level of performance over 4 days? And if we could do that long term, let's take Friday off. And that's what they've done, and they've achieved it. And it was the skills and the tools that allowed distributed workforces, that allowed them to drive up the quality and productivity of their workflows. And now it pays off. They've got Friday off 52 times a year. So that's the first case study.
Frank, just as you said that, I put a link to an alchemy up in the chat. Is that the right alchemy?
Two eyes at the end.
Yeah, we've got it. We're on a roll here. It's only downhill from there. That's what I can say. Okay, so you gave a really useful definition. I think when we talk about the dictionary, the ISO one, it talks about a particular way that disruption happens. Disruptive innovation initially addresses less demanding needs. Does that hang together for you?
Well, I would say less served markets is what I would focus on. So yeah. I guess because of my background, if you want, I'll quickly give you the second case study, then I'll shut up for good. Yeah. The second one is a company called 1C or 1S in Russian. And 1C is effectively Sage, but in the emerging economies of the world. So everywhere I went, down to the tiniest towns in Central Asia, I found that most of my clients use this software, and I wondered why. So, give you a little bit of background. The company was founded in Moscow in 1991. Today, 5 million people use 1C software every day. The latest number I could get for turnover was 2016. At that point, they had $650 million in revenue. I don't know what the profits are, but I think they're significant. So how did they emerge in 91 and beat all of the other people, including Sage, to dominate? And when I asked people in Central Asia, for example, they said they made it really easy to pirate the software. And so what they did was they removed all of the obstacles and friction to very poor SOHOs and SMEs. People who really couldn't afford to pay for licenses could basically get a CD from a mate, put it into their laptop, their desktop, and start doing their basic accounting needs. What's interesting is, that's how it started. But as companies moved from being very poor in Central Asia to being successful using these tools, they needed more sophistication. They needed to upgrade the software, and they needed consultants to help them to understand how to move to a kind of an ERP engagement with the software. And there were no problems hiring consultants because the consultants could see that all their neighbors were already using 1C. And they could make a fairly valid judgment that a percentage of those would need to go up the food chain in terms of sophistication. And that's what happened. So 1C now has probably as strong an ecosystem as SAP or Oracle, but in 95 countries, most of which are really on the lower end of the scale economically. So what's interesting for me about this is that disrupting is natural in emerging economies. If the status quo can lift these people out of poverty and up the ladder towards wealth, then they will choose the orthodox path. If it doesn't, the default is to break the rules and even things up with their peers in wealthier economies. And interestingly, my own research says that in Ireland, our DNA is the same. We have a very difficult relationship with authority. We have very large amounts of difficulty with accepting orthodoxy. And I think we should embrace that. So disruption, for me, thinking about it from the market size backwards, is when you find a way to serve an underserved market and you find a price, a route to market, a product definition that works for those less served markets. And that's me done.
So if I parse that just for a second, you're using the word markets repeatedly. It's a piece of, not the whole. It's the underserved piece or underserved pieces or elements that people don't get, rather than replacing the whole market in one go necessarily. Okay, so I'd love to open that out to the crew, and I know Alan is first up. That'd be fantastic. And I absolutely know that each of Frank and I do tend to take a private sector perspective, so we need to probably build on that or add a different perspective as well. Yeah. Alan, over to you.
I've just an observation on the two case histories that you had, and they both have one thing in common, which is a mindset shift where both of those companies said, we're going to leave money on the table in some way, or we're going to accept a hit in some way. So, if you look at both of those things, right, alchemy, that case history where you're sort of saying, well, we can get all of this work done in 4 days and then take Fridays off. Now, I've come from working with lots of people who would sort of say, we can get all this work done in 4 days. Great, we can just
20% more.
Increase that level of efficiency to the 5th day and just take home all of that money, never mind your feckin' days off or your let my people go surfing or whatever that is, Patagonia hippie nonsense. We're staying in the office for 5 days and you're working that hard, right? And the other guys, the 1C versus, I cannot see any of the large kind of accountancy packages kind of going, yeah, sure, listen, let's lower the protections, let's get it out there, let's go viral. Like, it's a very different mindset. And I think probably, those are mindset shifts rather than, I know there's enabling technology in the alchemy scenario to enable them to work more efficiently, to enable them to be distributed. And in the 1C, I'm guessing there's some kind of secret sauce that allows you to run on a Pentium 486 or something in Kazakhstan on zero internet, and it comes on a floppy disk or whatever.
Yeah.
Like that, that's great that they've taken that kind of grassroots distribution thing. But, both of those thought processes are kind of anathema to the large organizations that you read the case histories about, that you get the Harvard Business School and the Forbes magazine write-ups on. They're doing something different, but, and I like where they're coming from, but, how do you, if you're in an existing organization, if you're a innovation consultant, and your recommendation to your client is, have you thought about this? And they're looking at you kind of going, how is that not just putting a huge hole in the boat, basically?
I think the key thing is the idea of moving from orthodox to new thinking. And I think the key thing for me is that deep in the DNA of entrepreneurs, their job is to unmake reality. And so when you're working with the companies I've mentioned have done that. And I haven't mentioned money, because when I'm working with CEOs, I say to them, the money, the P&L and the cash position, they're the scoreboard. You've nothing to lose. It's a scoreboard. You need to focus on creating value for customers. And if you optimize that, the scoreboard will be in your favor. It's a bit like a hurler standing on a pitch and saying, "Fuck, we're losing the match." And I go, "What are you doing about it?" "I'm watching the scoreboard. We're losing the match." And I think so many companies that are successful forget that that's the money is derived. It's not the purpose. And I think if you can get CEOs and leaders to really focus on their customers, this is such an American phrase, be customer centric. It means bullshit. But actually, in terms of economics, the reason we exist is to create value for customers. It's not to make money. The money is just a happy outcome from doing that successfully. And once you have that mindset, then you're open to all these new ways of thinking of serving markets. Does that make sense?
It does. I can imagine it's not a popular view among CFOs and people whose job it is to just mind the score sheet, and it's somebody else's job to just throw it across the corner to the innovation lab or to the sales team or to the marketing team to, to do the fluffy customer value. But I've got a shareholders meeting or a quarterly reports announcement to make. So, at a certain scale, I guess you're just not in that. You can't have that conversation, I think. But if you're a publicly quoted company, the scoreboard's the scoreboard's the scoreboard, and you live or die by it. But if you've got that layer beneath that, where all of the vibrant kind of proper interesting companies are doing stuff, I think that's where you have the conversation. But I don't see Intel or anybody just going, let's all take Fridays off, because it'd be great for our well-being.
Alan, on that mindset question, I think that goes straight back to Clayton Christensen and his take on disruption and the story he likes with Dell being disrupted every step of the way by its own supply chain. But I have a question before we move on, which is, we talked about the definition, and that's not exciting, so we need to move off it. That's right. So just want to be sure if there's anybody in the group who wants to go back and talk about disruptive innovation. Is that not clear? Or is there anybody who thinks we should be looking at a different aspect of it? And if there isn't, great. If there is, just put a note in chat and we'll come back to it. And meanwhile, we'll move on to Paul. Dive in there, Paul.
Yeah, so if you can manage to cope with turning on the mic in Teams. I think actually the whole disruptive innovation, to my mind, it's really about underserved markets. So it's not about, I think, vendors tend to focus on a market size as being finite, whereas disruptive innovators, really what they do is they expand the market, not necessarily intentionally. But if you look at the history of computing, so really what we do is we started off with mainframes, and then you had the mini computer came along, and really what that did is it was targeting a smaller market because they simply couldn't afford to buy mainframes. So they really identified that there was an unserved market. So that's really came along. So you had the likes of Digital Equipment Corporation, and obviously they were kind of very successful for a long period of time. And then you had the personal computer came along, because really what that was doing is it was serving an even smaller market. And obviously you kind of had mainframe, mini computer, PCs, servers. So really they were kind of identifying new markets, new opportunities, usually at a better price point. So it was market expansion. I think that's almost like a characteristic of disruptive innovation. So even you talk about the whole video versus video store versus kind of over the Ethernet or over the internet. It's a new opportunity to serve clients who either don't have access to a video store, don't want to go to the video store, whatever. So it's expansion. It's not necessarily that the needs are simpler, it's that they cannot afford the products that are currently available. So that's kind of my take.
And that's the perspective of the people being served, the customers, the users, the market. The perspective of the provider of that service to the market might be slightly different. The perspective of the supply chain and the ecosystem and the context could be different again.
Well, I think the thing is, if you're the incumbent, then the thing is you've identified a certain market. This is our product. This is what it costs. We're not willing to go down market. We're not willing to kind of cheapen our product. We don't think that demand is there. someone else to kind of take the risk. But I think it's almost like I remember kind of seeing references. It's almost like eating your own children, so to speak. They don't want to sacrifice their existing market.
It's interesting, like Paul, if you think about and going back to what Alan said, if you think about some of the bigger companies like Oracle and Cisco on a regular basis take some of their smartest people, give them 100 million and say, feck off and beat us. Yeah. And Oracle effectively did the same thing because Larry went into Salesforce and then later he went into NetSuite. And again, it was, as you describe it, eating their own children. Yeah. Because, in economics, in the short term, you innovate and make margin. In the medium term, you have competition and margin reduces. And in the long term, there is no long term. Yeah. So if you're Cisco or you're Oracle, while the financial director might be focused on the quarterlies, the people who are owners of strategy understand that the status quo will not last long, and they need to actually reinvent to remain relevant. Does it make sense?
Yeah. Well, I think the other example of that is Zoom. So the guy who created Zoom worked for. I'm trying to remember now. It was the big kind of web conferencing software. Zoom came along, and now we talk about Teams and Zoom, and I can't even recollect who.
WebEx.
Yeah, WebEx. Yeah. But that's the thing, is kind of, it essentially the guy worked for them. He said, we can do better, deliver better product and all the rest, and they kind of just ignored it. So he went off, created the software, and kind of the rest is history.
Thanks for that, Paul. Now, I know Catherine's been trying to get in for a while, but Shane, you've got a couple of good comments in the chat. I think we should let Catherine go, but I'd love to hear from you on that.
I would say it's related, and Frank, to your point, now, as we learned from the Reinvention Summit, that the S curves and the length of time of any industry now is shortening and shortening and shortening. What we used to make our decisions based on things that lasted decades, and now we're lucky if we get to 5 to get to 10 years. And by virtue of the kind of what do they say, the caboose catching up with the train, is that it's disruption at our very core, because we're trying to disrupt a business, an industry, a technology, and our sense of ourselves in much shorter timeframes now. So it can feel disruptive at a very sort of elemental level, never mind about a business model or a technological level, that we're nearly permanently disrupted now.
We are VUCA.
Yeah.
Or BATI, I believe. Someone told me that BATI is taking over from VUCA. I can't even remember what BATI stands for, but I like the sound of it. Shane, what have you got for us? Because you got a couple of really good comments in the chat.
Oh, I guess I was rambling on about various things that were examples of similar behaviors. I guess it's, and maybe this is obvious, but the case studies that Frank went through there, and when we talk about disruption, that's what we tend to do, tell stories of successful disruption. And everyone goes, great, yeah, I want to be one of those. And if you're in the startup space, I'm here in Dogpatch Labs today, and everyone's like, yeah, disruption, let's do that. Disruption equals excited venture capitalists flinging millions of euro at you if they think you're the new Stripe or the new, whatever unicorn, which is, I guess, another word for successful disruption. But it's not a very comfortable word the rest of the time. And the truth is, everyone wants to own a piece of the disruptive technology, but nobody wants to be disrupted. Like, consumers are not saying, hey, disrupt my reality and give me something new. Said Spotify, they disrupted, well, they weren't alone in doing it, but that key shift from, the piracy mode into the licensing mode, and it being possible to gatekeep at the point of use was the key difference. But in terms of a business model, it has absolutely destroyed the industry in which it operates. So, that's an example of disruption that's successful and destructive at the same time.
What about the Quark Express example that you put there?
Well, Quark kind of no longer exists, but they were the original kind of, desktop publishing software, and it was very expensive and endlessly pirated. And I guess the long tail of the story is that at the time that Quark was the main kind of page layout software. Photoshop was the main video editing software. And now if you look at that market, Adobe are dominant. So Photoshop basically ate Quark and largely did it by successfully migrating from piracy to licensing. And so now Adobe is a cloud service. You can't even open the application unless you're connected to the internet. So yeah. So I'm not sure. There's an image I have in my head. Does anybody play backgammon? Okay, so backgammon, if you play it the straightforward way, is quite deterministic. You know, whoever gets the highest scores and the doubles earliest will always win if everybody behaves in a rational way and just makes the sensible move every time. But I used to play a ton of backgammon with my younger brother, and I discovered an alternate strategy, and I'm sure I'm not the only one to discover this, that when you're behind, the only way to win is to disrupt. And the way you disrupt in backgammon is, instead of trying to protect your pieces, you scatter them everywhere so that the other person has no choice except to capture them. And then you get behind enemy lines, and then they're nice, neat, I will maintain my advantage strategy falls apart. I guess the metaphor there is nobody wants to be disruptive unless they have to. And by the way, that disruptive strategy, most times it fails in backgammon. But when it wins, boy, does it win.
See American foreign policy of the last 6 months for examples of that exact strategy.
Yeah, like what Shane's saying is true. And I mentioned this about the negative impact of Zoom and Teams. Like there's a great line, I've forgotten the detail. I was hoping to find it there online, but it was somebody made a snarky comment that Craigslist turned a $10 billion profitable business into 100 million profitable Craigslist. So they destroyed all of the classified advertising for media, and they're successful, but you know, huge amounts of industry was destroyed in that kind of. RIP.ie. When I was in the Examiner, we made about 1.2 million a year from births, deaths, and marriages. You know, I don't think newspapers make anything like that now. So disruption is unmaking reality. So as a species and as individuals, we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing, and does it make things better or not? So, you know, do no evil is probably too limited an ambition for innovation. I think you probably have to create more value than it is there, because you're going to be dead pretty soon. That's fairly disruptive.
What do you mean we're going to be dead soon? What are you saying?
That's it. You got a very limited amount of time where you're actually valid as an entrepreneur. You know, you go from teenage rebellion to dotage very quickly. So you, in that little segment in between, you have a chance to unmake reality. That's it, and it's very short.
So there's a comment in the chat on this occasion. It's from Eric. I'd like to go back and challenge him on his point, if he's willing to share his wisdom with us. What do you mean you can't disrupt by intent? Go on, back it up there, folks.
I think when you look at the success stories and like the disruption, the devices, products that have disrupted the market, we all look at that with hindsight. I don't think those people set up and say, let's disrupt the market. They set up because they believed their ideas was a good idea, and they developed a product that disrupt the market. When Netflix decided to make their products available online, they were all still doing the DVD business, but they thought, oh, there's a new market we can serve. And then as that market grew, and that became disruptive to the blockbusters. I don't think Netflix decided one day, let's disrupt blockbusters and let's put everything online. That it was their journey brought them to disruption, but I don't think they set up to be disruptive. They set up because they took a business decision, and that appeared to disrupt the market. That's my opinion.
And it looks like about the 12 people are prepared to let you get away with that. I won't. Just to be awkward. Just, you know, just so that we have someone taking the opposing position. I think it's possible, and I think when you look at Francis's comment, you can see another example of the limitations, the constraints that you're talking about. But in my own experience, there have been occasions where I have set out, or the people I'm working with set out to disrupt. And to go back to a comment made just a couple of minutes ago, most of them failed. but it was there was an intent, you know.
Yes,
God,
and did they
God bless
succeed?
him. Yeah, well, Mr. Trump does intend to disrupt. It's how the man thinks, if that's the right word. But it is how he approaches things. So,
well, we had a conversation on yesterday about this, and I was just thinking back to, you know, noise, I think, is different to disruption. So noise is really what Trump is about. But I was thinking about John Hume, who really was dedicated to changing the reality of how you come through a peace process. And he had the heft and the intent and the energy and the intellect to do that. And I do believe that what happened on Good Friday has changed the way peace processes work globally. And I think he has a long-term impact on the world. I think making noise is not the same as disruption. And I really wonder if Mr. Trump is going to have that same impact on the world that John Hume did. That's just a view. We just had that chat yesterday.
Yeah, that story, we didn't go and get a reference for it, by the way, because we discussed it and moved other things. But for those who aren't familiar with it, like, there is peace after a fashion in Northern Ireland. And how did it happen? And John Hume was the first person who saw how it actually could succeed. And in order to make it succeed, you'd have to ignore a lot of shibboleths. You'd have to march right through a whole lot of orange and other, you know, barriers. And it's extraordinary as a story. And he certainly did disrupt. And it certainly is different from just liking chaos, the Trump thing. And I think it's a great example for disruption. We must find a way of finding a good reference for that. That might make a good thing to inspect again. Eric's given us another couple of comments. Eric and Francis, Spotify, yeah, more crappy for musicians, true. And I think Francis has a good deal of experience of that directly. Francis, can you speak to us, or are you not available?
Sorry, no, my camera's just not on. Yeah, I just have a gripe about Spotify because I worked in the music industry and I've refused to subscribe to it. But it's just, you know, just as you're all talking, sometimes those disruptions come, like Spotify disrupted an already shitty business model for artists with something that still continues to benefit shareholders more than musicians. So, you know, from a social perspective, my underlying rebel perspective, I don't like it. But you know, in health tech where I work, it is very hard to fundamentally disrupt, but I am working with people who have done it. You know, like the central venous catheter thing is a fundamental question. I know I had a colleague who was always trying to disrupt it. It's a tube into your body to deliver vital medicine to the core of your central system. And are there other ways to do that? Probably yes. Are people willing to change their clinical practice to do it? That's the big question. But at the same time, I'm working with a crowd who, within my company, we bought the company where there was almost an element of technology finding a problem, but it was the Barrigel product, which is used to reduce negative health outcomes from treating prostate cancer with radiotherapy. And it's basically the injection of a hyaluronic acid gel between the rectum and the prostate, so that when you treat the prostate, the rectum doesn't get irradiated, basically, because fundamentally that causes inflammation and an awful lot of really negative health outcomes. And that just didn't exist. Like, they knew that radiotherapy, they were getting the radiotherapy machines more and more targeted, but it was still never going to be good enough. There's always a bit of spray of those rays. So actually, can you think differently about how you can go into the body and do different things? Yes, you can. So it's difficult, but not impossible. So I've just rambled there on a few things.
I like that ramble. Thank you very much, Francis.
Thank you for that, Jill, as well, as somebody of a certain age.
Catherine.
There you go.
Just back to the radical thinking about the peace process, and actually at the Tech Summit, we had a drive-by from Alistair Campbell, who I don't know if all the people on the call are aware of him, but he certainly was famously the spin doctor for Tony Blair during that time. of the peace process in Northern Ireland. But and he now famously has I think one of the busiest podcasts in the world or something. But he made the point that only for the array of personalities involved, difficult though they were, they all got on board with the difficulty, the radical approach, and the hard decisions that were going to be needed to make a real change. And he made the point that he doesn't think now that would have worked, or even with the same, the same characters. It's the context you're in, the people you've got, and who ultimately is prepared to back the idea. We're talking about, the VC people want to row in on a unicorn because they nearly want it to be safe. But at the end of the day, somebody has to make a decision, and somebody has to take a punt, and somebody has to push the envelope. And in the case of that peace process, there was a series of people, but it took how long? I mean, years. Yeah. And it was fragile, and it's still fragile.
If I could just jump in briefly, but actually it's back to you. In Ireland, we have Research Ireland. There are things they don't do. That they have some responsibility for innovation, but they mainly do R&D. But they do at least understand that they have a role on the uncertainty end of innovation, and that their job is to act essentially like a VC, but for stuff that VCs won't invest in. And given that Ireland has a really crappy VC market, then Ireland needs that, whether it should be from Research Ireland alone or with others or in a different, better context. That's another discussion. Is Ireland's innovation or investment landscape ripe for disruption? But I love the example, and I love that you've taken us out of the earlier kind of lens on this. Do you have anything more uniquely non-government or uniquely charity or uniquely government in terms of disruptive innovation?
Well, I would argue that the, shall we say, the research complex, academia, etc., and our governmental policy making is by its nature evidence-based, okay? And they are looking for, and it is purely from a risk mitigation perspective. They want to have 45 voices saying the same thing, to say, here's our deep research on X, Y, Z before we move forward with anything. Now, by default, that is slow and retrospective. Right. Now, I'm not suggesting that we get into vibe investment, but there's a certain level of firstly, the level of risk aversion is, we're going to have to do something about that, and to create some sort of institutional knowledge about taking risk. But in order to respond at the pace that the world is now changing, we're doing yesterday's homework.
Going back to the Reinvention Summit, jumping the S-curves, jump them early. We ain't doing that.
What's interesting is the word radical is really interesting for me. And I'm going back to Alan's first comments, which I think frame things really well. So the people who are focused on the quarterly results, on the financial results, and holding on to stuff, they're never going to solve the housing problem in Ireland. And the same goes for, if you give responsibility for research to a government institute, I'm not sure they're naturally set up to really make that happen in terms of developing. We got a piece of research out saying we're the highest educated in the world, and then below that you discover we're really low in terms of PhDs. So when it comes to actual research, Ireland is not at the forefront of learning. When it comes to housing, I put it to you, that's the thing. We need to get away from orthodox. It's really risky to be orthodox in terms of solving our housing crisis. We need people, and I hate using the word radical, but that's what we need. Like the safe pair of hands have fucked things up for the last 50 years. The people who have managed the state coffers to make sure that we didn't have huge debt, the people who spent after COVID. Like, fine, we've got a fab, but we're really well set up financially as a country right now, but we've no homes for our people. So that safety approach and risk averse approach has turned out to be really fragile, and it undermines everything we do. So I don't know, Catherine's better at this than I am, but we need something radically different.
But we reward known.
Yeah, always consistently.
We want certainty of spend. We want certainty, and that's when the behavioral scientists have to come into it. That's when we have to figure out some psychological means of moving people along in, I don't know. I don't even know what you call it. The psychological safety, and pardon my French to say, fuck it. You know, let's have a go. Let's ring fence, be it X amount of money, and make some sort of a commitment to say this is not going to be politically, difficult or whatever, because that is fundamentally our barrier to progress. It's the same in an organization. Will this impact me and my promotional opportunities or my whatever? Will this make me redundant because it's radical in its nature? Like, these are all human factors. There's nobody lacking the intellect. The challenge is the emotion and that the psychological safety to change.
Mm-hmm.
Is it the culture? Because if you go back to Alan's idea of people who are holding on to what they have, if that was the case in Northern Ireland, we'd still have people saying no surrender and a nation once again, and they'd be apart from each other. If you think about housing, the culture, how we do things around here is we're all about the building regs and all the things that you just said. Do we need to actually walk away from that? Because when the orthodox and the safe way doesn't work, surely as a species, we go to the next step, which is where disruption creates value.
Mm-hmm.
Can I maybe interject? I think the issue is it suits too many people for the status quo to continue. So whether that's in organizations, public sector, whatever it happens to be, too many people are wedded to that. And you talk about the housing crisis in Ireland. Well, there's housing crisis everywhere, but I look at stats for void turnaround in the Republic. It's bad in the UK, but it's absolutely shocking in the Republic. And it's like no one is saying we should be able to do this so much faster. Yeah.
Should now and should have been 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago. So it's not a new problem. Yeah.
But no one's got a grip of it. It's in the local authorities, and it's like it kind of just suits for it to take its time. No one's getting a rocket up the ass for it taking so long, because it just suits. It's status quo.
Well, let me put that broad question then. It's probably kind of the last question for this session, because I want to do a wrap up in about 4 or 5 minutes. Well, I think we'll have to do a wrap up in 4 or 5 minutes, whatever I want to do. So where would you say is most ripe for disruption in the island of innovation? Now, you don't have to talk, but I'll go around and I'll just say top of the head, Shane.
No idea.
Eric.
Education, but that's because it's the space I'm in now.
Frank.
Housing.
Aisling.
I was going to go with education as well, so I'm going to copy Eric.
Paul.
Well, I'm going to make a slightly different thing. I'm going to say that everyone thinks AI is going to disrupt everything. I don't think it is.
Oh, good one. Nice perspective. Thanks for that, Paul. That'll get us thinking. Catherine, I saw that. That's very good. That's your offer, the legal system. Alan.
I'm going to go I'll see your legal system and raise your financial system. I think that's probably where I see the biggest leverage. Having worked in a big bank, I just see there's so much incentive around exactly what Paul was talking about. Nobody's getting a rocket over changing it because it suits everyone to leave it the way it is.
Cool. Justin.
Very hard to be disruptive.
This is a bit of a bomb. I would say healthcare and public health as the level above that.
Okay.
Dermot.
We are not doing the right things today for tomorrow, both at a personal level and at a system level. It's going to cost a fortune.
I'll pass.
Paul, if you're really with us. He's thinking about it, Rocky. That means it's your turn.
Well, I just say everything.
Okay, and Francis?
I'll be like Justin and say health and healthcare.
Cool. Christopher?
I'll probably say, I can't really speak for Ireland these days, I want to be honest with you, but I'll speak for England.
Yeah.
I'll say, to be honest with you, airports, because the world I know the best. Yeah.
And you see that. By the way,
I
everybody who
live in
doesn't
and
know
breathe it every
Chris,
day.
Chris
Yeah,
is an
sorry.
airports guy, so that
Yeah.
makes sense. Anya,
Yeah.
what do you think? We can't hear you, Anya.
Yeah, can you hear me now? Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, I think everything really, because I think that, you know, we're all operating, we all know the theory. The theory's been around for a long time, and it may have evolved, but it's the practice that really needs to change and where the breakthrough needs to come. Like, everybody knows what needs to happen, but have we actually the will to make it happen, and the will to actually, the will to actually bring these things together? To the point you made earlier, Owen, is it just that we're all very comfortable in these silos? And we believe we want things to be different, but when it comes to us to having to behave differently in order to enable it, perhaps we're not so ready.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. Thanks very much. That was really quick, everybody. I would always look, I'm fascinated by the transport disruption that is happening, not just cars, transport, mobility, all that. And then I would say for Ireland, we have an enormous opportunity on energy to really disrupt ourselves and disrupt Europe as a market, wave, wind, all everything, the nature of the grid, all that stuff. So I think we could all tell stories of that nature. I want to do right, says Frank, but not right now. Yeah, bang on, Frank. Okay, Frank, do you have any last words on our conversation about disruption today?
No, to be honest, I'm really excited by the reaction in the room. So people are up for change, which is great.
Yeah, and we might try and break this down and come back to a piece of it and parse it a bit more, because today was across the top of it, which it had to be, I think, for our first go at this. Thanks for that, everybody. I know, Alan, you've been doing a lot of work on podcasts. Can you give us a little flavor of what's been happening and where we are with that?
Well, we were kind of aiming for a cadence of one a month, and we have our second one has been out. It's slow burner like all these things, but there's a long tail on them, I think. So, people will probably look at around episode 4, they'll go back and hoover up 1, 2, and 3. Do you know, it works that kind of way? But we're building a body of content. What I found very interesting about it is that we have weaponized chats. So, this conversation that we have, conversations that we have among one another, this is kind of our group superpower. We pick a topic, we riff on it for a bit, and then with the much maligned AI tools, the ability to extract a transcript, number one, and then to turn that transcript into lots and lots of other content means that we can kind of, what I'm aiming to do with the whole thing is curate these kind of conversations, these great chats that we have, and then, take subject matter from them, curate them. And I'm not working on doing them from these open chats, but it's a thought that we could invite lots of people. We've got lots of great talkers and lots of interesting concepts come up in these things. So mining these ideas from these chats and going, oh yeah, but let's do something about education, or let's do something about the legal system, or let's do a podcast about housing, and some of the people that were most vocal and interesting on the calls, let's bring those in. So we're refining the format, but it's becoming easier and easier to turn these things out, and it's the gift that keeps on giving. Nobody seems to be extrovert or interested enough to want to do video podcasts, but that's a whole other barrel of monkeys. There's all hair and makeup and stunt doubles and everything involved in that, animal wranglers. So we haven't gone near that yet. We've just gone audio, but the amount of different types of content you can extract from that audio is fascinating. So I think we'll be looking to do the rounds of the community for number one, suggestions. If you haven't listened to episodes, there are 2 episodes up there now. They're both great. Go and listen to them. Give us some feedback, warts and all. We're brave enough to take good critique and fair criticism. Suggestions for topics. Owen, you don't want criticism. No, okay. Well, don't criticize Owen then, because he's a snowflake. But you can criticize me all you like. I'm well used to it. And yeah, I think it's a voyage of discovery. You know, you kind of think you know podcasts because you listen to lots of them, and you go to do one, you go, oh, that's interesting. Didn't realize there was that aspect to it as well. So getting our feet under the table, 2 episodes in, you all have an opportunity to form the future of the podcast. So pile in there, tell us what you think, and yeah, let us know. Have a listen. We're you know 50 or so listeners, 50 60 downloads of each episode so far. So you know we're reaching people. We're reaching more people than these calls, and these calls are great. Not reaching as many people as Joe Rogan yet, but I don't think that's in anyone's playbook. But it is a fascinating format, and I think it has a lot of value. People seem to like them.
You have to be super duper duper disruptive to be like Joe Rogan. So that's what we can take for the next podcast.
Super disruptive, like Joe. Well, I think Aisling,
He's
I know
very,
you're
very
known as a
disruptive.
disruptor. We'll get you in to put the cat
No
among the
problem.
pigeons.
I have been called the disruptor in a couple of meetings, and I'm like, oh well, someone has to do it.
You're
I
in
think
good
you were
company
called the
here,
disruptor.
Aisling.
I think you were called a disruptor by me in one of my
Yeah,
lectures.
yeah, that was
actually,
that too. But sure,
in
no,
fairness.
have to
And
do
you
it.
got
While you were talking, Alan, Shane is asking the obvious question. Where do you find the podcasts?
Not on
So-
Spotify.
Apple and
Francis would
Spotify.
say.
If you type in, if you go to, actually, we've been trying to corral people back to the Circle community, which is the Innovate Ireland feed on that. So there's a link to it there. And but if you type in Innovate Ireland, the innovation conversation from Innovate Ireland, any of those kind of things, you'll find them on Apple and Spotify, or go back to our LinkedIn links and they're all linked in there. So there's a bunch of places you can find them.
They're also on the Innovate Island portal, and we have a section called podcasts. So
Sorry,
it's,
yeah,
on,
that's the
it's on the
Circle
menu on
page.
the left. So there are
Yeah.
a number of easy ways to do it, which is the only way it could work. And you know, it's great. We're looking forward to it, but it's early days. Okay, so Alan, if you are happy that you've kind of closed the book on that, thank you very much. I think that was great and timely. And the reactions we got on what we've done so far are fantastic. But yeah, tell us, too long, too short, too whatever. And the next one should be, we're really looking forward to that. Quick comment about what's upcoming. First of all, for today, Frank, thank you very much for putting manners on that and for diving in and giving us the case studies. That was really, really valuable. We didn't get to dive into antifragile, which I'd like to one of these days. I had a case study that I was going to share with you, but we had so much fun with the others that we didn't get to talk about it. So that Revolution Zero case study is in the chat, and it's a client, and it's a client that may fail tomorrow or next year or may do great things. So I'm not selling anything, but I'm really curious what people think about that kind of context. Similar enough to France's context as well. Let me just say what we've got now. In June, we have next week, we have a speaker's corner. So there's someone who's outside of Innovate Island. He was a visitor to our shores from the States for the Reinvention Summit, and Charlie met him and got him to volunteer to do a session with us next week. The CEO of Self. I might have butchered the title, but the idea is in order to lead others, you need to lead yourself. And it goes right back to what we said here, Anya's comment about will for big change. And I'm really looking forward to that. We got a flavor of it already at the event. And then on the 20th, we have David Tye from the Central Bank telling us how they've managed to use sandbox approaches very successfully to date. And it makes you think, well, we talk about how you can't innovate in Ireland, but they seem to be doing great things, tearing up houses. Let's see. Let's see what he has to say. I'm fascinated. And then just to remind you, July, August, you don't have events, but the communications and the posts and other things will continue. So I think I've updated you completely. I think it's time for us all to go and enjoy our long bank holiday weekend. Amen. Thanks, everybody. See you soon.
Have a great weekend.
Thanks. Thank you very much.